Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back. So, finally going to get around to making the wiring harness, or redoing the wire. Finally going to get around to making the wiring harness, or more so redoing the wiring harness for the engine side. I'm not going to touch the car side because it's all done. You know, I did that a while ago when I switched over to Fuel Tech. Probably a few things that could be fixed, but like I said, it's a two-part harness. So we got these, got these bulkhead connectors that connect the engine to the ECU, so that when I have to pull the engine, which is pretty frequently, it's just a little quarter twist on this guy and engine harness pops off. Just throw it over the engine, pull the engine out, yada yada yada. But anyways, this is the old harness, and the reason why this harness looks like this is that this is essentially the factory Escort GT harness that has been recobbled a few times over now to make it work. And the only reason why it exists like that is because I'm lazy. I didn't feel like building a new harness from scratch, but this time I'm just going to go ahead and build a new harness from scratch. The harness inside the car is a whole new harness. There's nothing left of the factory stuff. So there's no reason why I shouldn't have just gone ahead and also did the engine side harness, other than, like I said, being a little lazy. So got all my stuff here. Got a couple of different wire colors. So we got an engine coolant sensor. We've got our crank angle sensor, our CAS. We have, what are these guys? I think these are just some general connectors I bought that I might need, but right now this is the only thing that I need one of these for, is for the idle control valve, which is this guy right here. So that will plug into the idle control valve. These are injectors. Probably the most important ones there, injectors. What else we got here? These are the female side to these, or male side. Yeah, these are male side to these connectors. Didn't really need them, but bought them anyways. And we have the throttle positioning sensor. So that's what that guy is. There is throttle positioning sensor. I also will be reusing some connectors. Well, these I won't reuse because I bought some extras of these. Bought some of these. Wow. Okay. Might not reuse this one because this is for the boost control solenoid, but I did buy new ones to replace those. But I don't know. Then I also bought some 3-pole connectors. The reason why I bought these are the 2-pole. Those are the wrong ones. These are the 3-pole. So I bought some 3-pole connectors. And this is for the new crank angle sensor, because so I'll be I won't be using the factory crank angle sensor. I'll be using the this trigger wheel on this guy. I will also be using the CAS for the cam angle sensor, but I'll talk about that in just a little bit. But anyways, I'll be replacing this connector because I couldn't find the other end online anywhere. And so I was like, screw it, I'll just replace the connector on both ends, Alright, and I've made a nice little mess here. So yeah, tools. So this is a crimper used for crimping on those barrel type connectors, those actual nice pin connectors. Also need it for these because they're the same type of connector. I got just my kind of standard crimper for these are for these type of connectors. If you're familiar with those guys, that's what those are for, and just some random various standard. I don't think I'll need these for pretty much anything. I don't know, there may be a few barrel connectors for some stuff. I don't know. Some different types of strippers, and I got another pair of strippers around here somewhere, but I really prefer they're just your standard claw type strippers. I got some nice little blue points there. I mean, obviously these are easier to use, but sometimes you just kind of like you just get used to using these. I think I can use these faster than I can use these, honestly. So yeah, and then I got some string here. So, and obviously wire sleeving and heat shrink and all that stuff. So let me straighten this stuff up and we'll get to it. So of course the other thing I did, which is probably the most important thing that I kind of forgot to mention, was this. And this is basically what I did was what I did here is I've got all my sensors. You know, so we got a cam crank, flex fuel sensor, TPS, speed sensor, oil, air or intake air temp sensor, and coolant temp sensor. And then we've got injectors 1 and 2, spark 1 and 2, boost, idle, and start. So these are all the outputs. I was originally going to do a sequential injection, but I only have one output left on the fuel tech, and I don't want to give up anything because I'll either have to give up the start function, which is where I can start the car through the push button or through the on-screen button. It's not a big deal. I mean, I could easily just switch it back to using the switch, but I don't know. I kind of like having that feature, and I don't want to give that up. The other output I could give up would be the idle output, because I mean, I can get the car to idle well enough, but I like having it idle low and ramp up if it needs it, so I don't really want to give up that output. So for now, and there's not really a huge benefit going from semi-sequential to full sequential. If it was batch fired, and yeah, there would be a benefit to go to a sequential, but from semi-sequential to sequential, it's not a big deal. And if you're not familiar with what sequential is versus semi-sequential, so basically you have injectors 1 and 3 are connected together, and then 2 and 4 are connected together, if that makes any sense. So basically when these two fire at the same time and these two fire at the same time, because those cylinders are 180 degrees out from each other, so one will be firing on the exhaust stroke, basically, of you know, would it be the exhaust? Yeah, I guess it would be the exhaust stroke. And one will be firing on the intake stroke. So, and then plus the nice thing about the batch fire or the semi-sequential is that you get those nice fireballs in the exhaust. So that's cool. But that, I'm going to keep that the same. But anyway, to this stupid little chart. So basically I got all my sensors, and then what they are, or this was more so for me coming up with a wiring scheme and keeping track of how many wires go to each sensor and everything like that. So these are all signal. I think I'm just going to make these all white. Originally I was going to do white, green, and brown, just so I had some variation, but I think I'll just do them all white. And then of course you have to keep track of what's what when you're building the harness, but that's not a huge deal. I got a little label maker I'll use to keep track of each wire. And then the next wire is your power, if there is power. So these are all 12 volts. So there's 12B and 12A. These are all 12B, but there's some 12 volts that comes through the two 12-volt wires I have coming through the second connector. One's connected to one relay, and the others are connected to a different relay. So basically, cam crank, flex sensor, and injector 1 and 2, they are all on the one relay, and then the spark I split out to a separate relay fuse setup, just so that it's not, just to kind of balance the current that's being drawn. I didn't want it all on one fuse and all on one relay, because it's a lot of stuff. So basically, most of the accessory kind of stuff is on one, and yada yada yada. Then of course, you know, your 5-volt for your TPS, your speed, and your oil sensor, and then your returns and stuff like that. So that way I know that the cam needs 3 wires, the crank needs 3 wires, and it needs a signal wire, a power wire, and a return wire. Same thing for my outputs, you know, same thing. They all need a 12-volt source, and then there's a signal wire. In this case, every output basically gets a constant or a switch 12-volt source, and then the ECU will control those items by turning the ground on and off, or by basically toggling the ground. So that's how the injectors work. They constant 12 volts, and then the ECU will modulate the ground signal to pulse the injector. Same thing with spark, and same thing with boost. Another thing I forgot to mention with the wires is that for your crank and cam, you're going to want to use a shielded wire. It doesn't have to be this fancy. This is some fancy space wire we had extra of that was gifted to me. And this is a 2-conductor wire. I don't necessarily need 2-conductor wire, because when I had it running to the cast, that was convenient, because then I could have both the crank and the cam sensor ran together. But since the crank and cam sensor are going to be separate now on opposite ends of the engine, I'm basically just gonna I'll either just tie these 2 conductors together, going to each, or I'll just use one or the other. I haven't really decided what I'm going to do yet. But yeah, so got 2 lengths of wire to go from crank and cam. But yeah, you have to use shielded wire. I mean, you could probably get away without using it, but if you have any noise that's introduced onto the crank or cam sensor, you're going to have problems. You know, those are the heartbeat and the brain waves of the engine. If the engine doesn't know where the crank is or the cam is, bad times. So, better just to shield it. So like I said, first thing I'm going to do, cam sensor. Or we'll start there. We already got most, you know, the ignition harness is the ignition harness is already made up. Carlos did a bang up job on that with his coil unplug kit. So all I need to do is just repin the other connector, the other half of this connector, and just plug that in. So I'll just do a real short pigtail for that. But like I said, right now we're going to worry about this guy. So I'm going to take my string. I'm going to route my string approximately how I plan to route the wire. I plan on tucking it up under the intake manifold, so that's where it is now. It's nice and firm up against the intake manifold. And I'm just going to kind of route it where I think it's going to go. It'll be something like that. And then approximate how far it needs to go to get to the firewall. Alright. So basically I'm just going to use this picture for reference, you know, when it was in the engine bay. You can see those bulkhead connectors are basically right above, like right in line with the fuel rail, kind of right behind the intake. So that way, kind of right below the intake. So that way I kind of know how long the harness needs to be. And it doesn't have to be exact. I can have a little bit of slack, but I don't want it to be really excessive. So like I said, we'll make that kind of taut, and then I'll pull a little extra so there can be some slack for routing, and then I'll just kind of approximate where that needs to go. And that'll be my overall length for the entire harness. And I just put a little zip tie on there to know what the length is, and that way I can move this around for the other sensors, the other stuff. You know, don't have to redo anything. Actually, you know, I could probably sell this on, you know, as a wiring harness, a wiring tool. You know, just a little string with a zip tie on it. It's $29.99 on Amazon. All right, so now we got a good approximation of how much we need there. I'm gonna take my shielded wire, and just kind of do one of these, and that's what I need. That'll be the first stretch of wire. Just as a sanity check, I'm gonna go back to the engine. Sometimes you may Houdini yourself. I go there, I go there, and that should be just about perfect. Should be all we need right there. So I'll base all my other wires off of that, or all my other for that sensor. I'm just, like I said, I'm just doing the one connector for right now. In fact, that might be all I record, is just that one connector and this one method, and then I'll do all the other connectors, and then I'll show you how I actually assemble the entire harness. So the other 2 links that we need is we need a power and a return. So we're just going to do some 18 gauge. I don't know if I have a whole lot of black left here. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to twist it partially anyways. Be mindful that when you twist the wires, they do shrink a little bit. So if you plan on twisting everything, make sure you kind of measure a little extra just to account for how much the wires are going to shrink. So you don't have to twist them. It does this. It just makes it a little easier, a little nicer. There also is a bit of a EMI benefit by twisting the wires. By twisting them, what you have here is basically a means of somewhat limiting the amount of energy that will make its way back to the ECU or to the sensor or vice versa. So if you have noise that's traveling on your power or your grounds, especially in DC in a differential kind of setup like this, you will a kind of simple way to take care of it or to help reduce the noise is by twisting the wires together. So what you have is you have basically electrons moving one direction to the sensor, electrons moving away from the sensor in the other direction, and then you have approximately like a 90-degree twist on them, you know, or 180-degree twist. And so what you have is this intersecting kind of path here and this parallel kind of thing, and you've got a basically, since one's one way, one's the other way, and they're crossing and they're exactly 180 degrees out from each other, they kind of cancel. The noise will cancel itself out if you do have noise traveling on the power. It doesn't 100% cancel everything out, but it does help. So it's just a, and once again, that's a very simplistic way of explaining it. If you really want to look it up, you can look up the whole EMI theory stuff and all that shit, but I'm not gonna teach you all that shit. So it is kind of it is kind of hard to get an even twist. It'll twist up a lot close to the drill and not as much near the end. Good enough for what we're doing. Good enough for government work. All right, so now we got the power and ground, and our signal wire. We need our connector. So that will be our connector to go to the, we got our pins. So like I said, there are two conductors in here. I'm just gonna pick one, you know, for this. Purple. I didn't realize I had purple. I had a whole extra color. Okay, cool. I thought that was blue. I thought I had two blues for some reason. So the blue with the white stripe will be my cam sensor. I need to write that down so I don't forget. Sunlight was really kind of messing with the dynamic range there a bit. Our little pins. I need 3 of them. I guess I could go ahead and connect both fins just so that, you know, it's there in case I need it for whatever reason. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll go ahead and we'll connect both these wires. I won't connect them at the bulkhead connector, but I'll connect them at the main connector just in case if, for whatever reason, my front crank sensor goes bad, I can have a backup crank sensor. It can be wired in or hooked up. Alright, so we got our crimpers. So, if you've ever used these, oops, way down here. So you've got the back end of the connector, so you're going to want your wire too long. You're going to have your wire trimmed right. So you're going to want the insulation, it's still too long. Where you're going to want this to do this correctly. So you're going to want the insulation to be here, right? And the wire to be in the the large. Oops. If that makes any sense. So you got, like I said, you got 2 parts of the connector. There we go. So you got 2 parts of the connector. You got that little tail end there, and you have the little shorter end there. So when your wire goes in, you're going to want to have your wire in the short end and the insulation on, inside the back half. And so when you crimp it, it'll actually crimp around the insulation and provide a nice mechanical support. Also, what you should do is not be a dumbass and forget your weather seals, these little blue doodads there. And they have to go over the wire, which means I will probably have to restrip these. I was trying to debate if I want to try and crimp that the weather seal onto the connector, but I think I'm actually going to push these down. The environmental seal, I should say. Is that the right connector? Hey, that's the wrong connector. I almost made a big whoopsie. This is the connector for the crank and cam sensor. How come you guys didn't say anything? Those little weather seals on. What am I, like 30 minutes into one fucking connector? So what I like to do is I like to take the connector, the pin, even though it's not really a pin, it's a socket. Might have to squeeze them together a bit so they fit. So I'll get the connector inside the crimpers. I don't think you can really see it in there, but she's in there. She's butted up the back end, right at the rear end of the connector. And I stick my wire in. Make sure that my wire is peeking through the top of the connector ever so slightly. And just give her a little crimp. And hopefully that's a good crimp. That looks like a good crimp to me. And you see, you get that nice, super fancy, professional crimp. So it's really important that it has that area that clamps around the insulation, because that crimp is so severe sometimes that it may break the wire. If it's allowed to bend right there, the connection can break. So that's why it's important to crimp correctly. I used to always just crimp these like without the proper tool. I rarely use these types of connectors. And when I did stumble upon them, I would I just use like a pair of pliers and fold it over and make it work. And it's really, really wrong. Alright, so I just need to strip that back a little bit. Put our little weather seals back on. I'm actually going to fold this over because this is a pretty thin wire. Not great, not horrible. These connectors are honestly too big for this gauge wire, but you know, just kind of go with what you got. Oh, found this dandy little picture online. That way I can figure out what pins go to what. The one that's important that I need is the SGC, I believe. Yeah, SGC for cam. So that's the most outer. I believe we're looking at this right. Yeah, plug will go in that way. So it'll be, I'll write this down. That way I just kind of know the order. So, what we're going to do, one with the white stripe will be crank. You should only lock in one way. So they go in that way. Good to know. Alright, so we got our cam. Crank wires are plugged in. We got our power and ground. So ground is the one furthest away. So we'll just go ahead and snap our power in there. That's not right. Get our ground in there. And see if we can squeeze these little Sealy boys in there. Yeah, those aren't wanting to go in. I'll have to fight with that a bit, but for now, that's one connector kinda done. Throw some sleeving on it. Alright, so I'm debating on if I want to go ahead and sleeve this or if I want to get more of the harness done. I think I'm going to go ahead and sleeve it though, just to show you a somewhat finished kind of product, you know. And we got the whole sleeving process here. I'm sure we've seen this before. Jesus Christ almighty. Like I said, this is one part of the harness. This will end up joining into another larger part. Take some heat shrink. So always cut a little extra sleeving because it will start to fray a bit. And so you're going to lose a little bit. I'm just going to force that down because our first little bit of the harness there then. Don't forget to push this guy down. That locks the pins in. I think there's a... thought there was supposed to be an O-ring that went in there. I don't know where that is. So there's our crank cam angle sensor. First bit of the harness. We'll go on right there. That'll be that little guy. So then we can do the coolant temperature sensor, I guess, next. We can run this along with that guy. So take this and... oh, that's going to leak. So run that along with that. Got those two guys. So yeah, we can do the cam sensor, or the cam sensor coolant temperature sensor next, I guess. That's an easy one. And we'll do the injectors.
One eternity later.
Alright, so this is basically the entire engine harness. Like I said before, this will be terminated in a connector. This end will be terminated in a connector that will bolt to the firewall. And these are all our sensors. You know, it's a little easier to see it off the engine, which is a great thing because it's like the whole intention was for it to be kind of tucked. So we've got our spare pressure sensor, or sensor in general. You know, so in this we've got a pink, brown, white. So pink is 5-volt reference, brown is a signal return, and then white is our signal that goes to the ECU. So then we have our crank sensor plug here, injector, injector, injector. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 for the injectors. We have our oil pressure sensor. We have our idle valve. We have our CAS. We have our TPS. We have our coolant temp. We have our air intake temp. And then we have the ignition coils. I don't know if I said this wrong the first time when I was talking about the ignition coils. Specifically when I was talking about... it's missing a thing. When I was talking about batch fire or semi-sequential injection and wasted spark. Semi-sequential, you're going to fire 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 together. For the ignition, you're going to fire 1 and 4 and 2 and 3 together. So the reason why it's done that way is because you don't want them to be synced. You don't want to have fuel and spark in a cylinder together that isn't firing. So now that I have this here, I'm going to begin removing all these extra zip ties, because I basically just added zip ties as I added cables. So I'm going to remove all the excess zip ties and get it minimalized. And then I'm going to, probably about here, I'm going to remove all of this, or probably here, remove all the excess braid and stuff, and get this ready to be twisted together to form a single harness, and then I can get that sleeved and a single piece of sleeve. That should make it look real nice. So I'm gonna work on that.
$2,000 later.
Alright, so I'm going to put this back on the engine, just to double check and make sure that everything is still where it's supposed to be. Nice thing about that is, you know, once it's on there, even though it's not really buttoned up or anything, you really can't see a whole lot of the harness. It's pretty much nice and tucked, and everything is nice and hidden. Should be nice and clean. It's definitely you know, better, a lot better than this mess I had going here. You know, this kludge, you know. So, all right. Alright, so now that I got the harness mostly done, I'm just going to clean this up. Weird. Alright, so as I was saying, I don't remember what I was saying, memory card got full. But yeah, I'm going to start at the center with my shielded cables, do all my low power inputs, and pretty much on the outside will be 12 volt and grounds and all that stuff. Or I might just do whatever. See.
"12 seconds later."
Alright, so I kind of cheated. Once again, this isn't a, you know, I'm not selling this thing. And I'm just playing around with this idea of the concentric twisting. Yeah, it's nice because it makes the harness super flexible. This isn't as tight as it could be because, like I said, I didn't use a jig, so it is kind of loose. But, like I said, it'll be sleeved and heat shrunk. I gotta say, is it worth it? Not necessarily, especially in something that's going to be installed, like, and it doesn't need to flex, it doesn't need to move, like if you're building a custom harness. Like, it makes sense if you're buying a universal harness, right? You're going to have to route that thing any which way. Then yeah, it's nice to have the flexibility. But if you're installing a harness into a static position, this is kind of overkill. What I will say is that I will probably always do this because it satisfies my OCD. It just scratches that itch so well. So, so anyways, unfortunately, this will be covered in sleeving, so you'll never see it again. Yeah, I guess I could find something that would stretch and be fairly see-through. But, yeah, you might be able to see it through that. Who knows? But I'm going to call it quits for now. Got this guy. I'll go over that in another video. Probably next video, when I pin this harness up. But yeah, that's pretty much it for now. Next video is I'll be ohming this guy out and pinning it and all that fun stuff. So, till next time.